I guess I just don't see how Japan avoids the war if there's an invasion of Taiwan.
Yeah, I don't know how much we should go into this right here openly, but I'm not as optimistic about the U.S. ability to respond to a Taiwan contingency, particularly after having lived in Taiwan. I was concerned before I moved to Taiwan. I'm still overcoming my depression after living in Taiwan about the prospects for U.S. capabilities in defending Taiwan.
So is that a question of military capability or political willpower?
Quite often here in Japan, also in Taiwan, people ask, will the U.S. be there for Taiwan or be there for Japan? To me, we're past the question of willpower. It's a question of capabilities. So asking whether we'll be there or not, that's sort of like, dreamland at this point. The real question is, does the U.S. have the capabilities anymore? And I question that, quite seriously. So back in the day, obviously China was weaker, Taiwan was relatively stronger, the U.S. was much stronger, and wasn't really sure what Japan would do. But things have changed, in recent decades. And I would argue China's a whole lot stronger than, we want to think it is. We're a whole lot weaker than we want to think ourselves to be. The truth lies somewhere in between there. Another huge thing that's changed is that a Taiwan contingency is no longer limited to the Taiwan Straits as it was, in the past. Now it could involve North Korean action on the Korean Peninsula or in the Sea of Japan. So that would immediately divide Japanese self-defense force attention between two theaters. It would also divide American attention between two theaters. It would prevent Korea, which has the most to lose from a Taiwan invasion, from being able to provide any assistance. And then you have Russia involved. And if you remember back in February 2022, between Putin and Xi Jinping, their meeting, that was basically a quid pro quo. China would recognize what Russia did in Ukraine, and Russia would essentially recognize what China eventually does in Taiwan. So essentially, it's a military alliance between them. So that'll bring a Russian front into Taiwan contingency. So that'll tie up the remainder of the Japanese self-defense forces up in the north. And I'm not suggesting that Russia will launch an invasion of Hokkaido, but they can do a lot of stuff to distract Japan, which would also distract the United States. So you have three fronts now. It's no longer limited to one front, the Taiwan Strait. Plus you have any activity that might happen in the South China Sea. So now you have a fourth front. Plus, and you've covered this extensively on your shows, all the Chinese foreign nationals that are abroad, South Korea, United States, Japan, there's 1 million Chinese citizens in Japan, and they're obligated, to abide by the 2010, National Defense Mobilization Law of China's. So they become, they basically participate in, incursions or, disturbances here in Japan. China, as you may have covered before, has stockpiles of weapons in Japan already. So those 1 million Chinese citizens that are in Japan, they can just go to their local stockpile, follow whatever instructions are given to them, and cause disruption. And if they wanted to, if they timed it well, they have, let's say, 10 cruise ships from Hokkaido all the way down to Ishigaki calling at Japanese ports, 4,000 or 5,000 Chinese on each of those ships, the holes filled with weapons. They could cause massive disruption at all the different ports. So that's your fifth front right there. So when you take all of these things going on simultaneously, I think that gives China a huge advantage to cover that 100-mile, Taiwan Strait, and then, the personnel they already have in Taiwan, and their strategy, for the time being, is to decapitate the Taiwanese government. To me, that's more like the real situation, right now.
Well, it sounds pretty hopeless. I guess we should probably just capitulate to whatever the CCP wants then, right?
No, we shouldn't. We should do what we can right now to build up deterrence, right?
Well, that's a good question, because that's very interesting for Japan because of, the post-war constitutions. They're limited to a self-defense force. By the time China invades, it's too late to develop that further. But how, within those restrictions, how can Japan develop its essentially military might? Because I would imagine not just China would be upset by that. A lot of other Asian countries would be very concerned about seeing this kind of development in Japan.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think any other Asian countries would be concerned about it. I think that's essentially a myth.
Really?
Yeah.
Even like South Korea?
Yeah, Korea, but any other Asian country, no, unless they're under Chinese thumbs. Yeah.
What are you saying about South Korea?
Well, increasingly, Japan and South Korea are working together on defense matters. So it's not so much Japan, it's been South Korea over the years. It's been the slow one to come along. But, more and more nowadays they are. And as I alluded to before, South Korea is the one that loses the most after Taiwan, if Taiwan were invaded, because they're going to be essentially blocked in after that. So they're going to have to step up, and they would certainly want Japan to be able to step up to that. About Japan being prepared, the legislation that you alluded to before, that it's an existential threat to Japan if Taiwan were invaded, that is like a bridge that would allow them to get involved somehow, not coming directly to Taiwan's aid, but helping the U.S., which is going to to Taiwan's aid. So it's still a little, from my perspective, a little bit removed from being directly involved in a conflict. So in my opinion, it needs to really step up its game. That's where the Taiwan Relations Act allows Japan to do a lot of different things that it should have been doing already. Japan has an unfortunate habit of correcting things after the fact. So, it's had a lot of disasters over the years. It's been after the disasters that it's taken the actions that it should have done before the disaster. So I call it Jikkan Shugi, where it realizes something after the fact. So I don't think it'll really, really develop its military until after some sort of contingency that had a huge impact on Japan. And what I mean by that is, for example, adopting conscription. I don't think right now Japan is willing to do that, but if it faced a situation where it needed to, after that happened, after it realized it, then it may try to do that. And then going back to your original question about how would Japan be involved, I think there are two factors. One is who's the leader of Japan at that time. So if you have somebody in the pro-China school, that person could be easily manipulated. So if you had a Kishida, if you had an Ishiba, that would make it very easy for China to take action. If you have somebody like Takaichi, or somebody who had a strong belief in defending the country, then that would make it a lot harder for China, but not impossible. But another scenario that I have in mind is that China knows Japan so well. It knows what buttons it can push, how far it can go. And as you know better about this. China's always, pushing the limits and seeing how far it can go somewhere. Within Japan, it knows this country extremely well. So what I think would happen in a situation in Taiwan, not every situation, but I think China would go out of its way not to hit U.S. bases in Japan. Therefore, Japan wouldn't have a reason to get involved in a Taiwan contingency, depending on who's the leader at the time, how they interpret an existential threat. So there are a lot of different what ifs, involved. But if it hits a Japanese base or a U.S. base in Japan, which is essentially Japanese territory, then Japan can exercise the right of self-defense, and it doesn't need any other, laws or legislation. But if China didn't hit a Japanese, U.S. base in Japan, didn't hit Japan, then Japan would struggle about how to respond.
There's a lot more of this hour-long podcast to watch. Just click below to see it at ChinaUncensored.tv. When you join us there, you can be part of my exclusive China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, where we stand up to the CCP together. The link is below.